Dear viewer, good evening and welcome to Current Issue. With me tonight, Senator Gary Peter. Welcome back to MEA TV, Senator.
Well, it's great to be with you, and we've been together on, been on your program for many years.
Many years.
It's always a pleasure.
Thank you very much, and thanks for coming. Honestly, we're going to talk about your visit to the Middle East, and especially the refugees camp. You see, how they're suffering and all that. And we're going to talk after that about the effort that you doing honestly to increase the number of refugees that could come to the United States, if it's Syrian refugees or Iraqi refugees. Let's talk about your visit. When was the visit, and what do you visit when you went to the Middle East?
Well, last month I took a trip to the Middle East to talk primarily about ISIS and the efforts combating ISIS. I serve on the Homeland Security Committee in the United States Senate, is one of the committees that I serve on, so certainly from a Homeland Security standpoint it's important to understand what's happening in the Middle East.
Yes.
But also part of that trip was also to understand what's happening to the people in both Iraq and Syria, and the refugee crisis, which of course is of the proportion we haven't seen in decades, a very tragic situation that we have to deal with. So during the trip, we spent some time in the UAE, and then Qatar, and then I went to Baghdad, was in Iraq, and then to the refugee camp in Jordan, Zatari, which is the largest refugee camp. Met with U.S. military officials, met with government officials in those countries, and then had an opportunity while in the camp to talk to refugees directly about their life and their hopes and dreams, and quite frankly, their really lack of hope right now, which is very sad.
Let's talk a little bit about, in a few minutes, about our government involvement to fight ISIS, and now there is the Russian. Are we doing enough job to combat and finish ISIS?
Well, the U.S. involvement right now with ISIS is primarily the air campaign, the U.S. Air Force and other air forces, Navy, and other air assets that are being used to fight ISIS. And that's in coalition with other countries as well that are flying missions. And certainly the report that I got talking to our military generals who are on the ground there is that campaign is going well, that they've been able to hold advances from ISIS, so that they've been able to do the proper targeting necessary to at least stop the advance. But ultimately, in order to take back territory, you're going to need soldiers on the ground, and in Iraq, there'll be the Iraqi army that'll be doing that. We are certainly all disappointed the Iraqi army didn't stand up like we all would have liked them to when they first moved in. But in talking to the U.S. generals who are involved in training Iraqi forces, and more importantly, making sure there's an officer corps that are leading it, they are confident that there are mission-capable Iraqi forces that will be able to push back against ISIS with the support of the United States in the air and other coalitions. So that's happening in Iraq. and Syria, it's more difficult. There really isn't a force. There isn't an Iraqi army and to train in Syria.
Or a government to deal with, and to cooperate and do that. How you see the Russian involvement lately?
Well, the Russian involvement just makes things more complicated, and it's not a positive development. I think it's a very negative development. And they have the Russians appear to have come in to support Assad, and they talk about targeting ISIS, and they've been doing some of that, but it also looks like they're targeting some of the Syrians who are standing up against the regime as well. So it only makes things more complicated. Ultimately, the only way that we move forward in the Middle East and in Iraq and in Syria is to have a political solution. You have to have people come together. There has to be reconciliation. There has to be an understanding of very diverse people that can live in peace together. There's not there isn't a military is part of it, but that's not the final solution. You need to have a peaceful political solution, and having the Russian military involved will only make that more difficult.
I see. How do you see the role of Iran, especially if the treaty goes, to effect? How do you see the role of Iran to fight ISIS and stable the Middle East?
Well, they're engaged in it as well, but as the more people you get involved, the more complicated it gets.
Yes.
And so it makes it, in many respects, much more difficult to do that. So we have a very tough situation, which is why there are so many refugees. It's why the camp that I was in had 85,000 Syrian refugees in Jordan, which is a real strain for the Jordanian government. And it's 85,000 in the camp, but there are many hundreds of thousands more throughout the country as well, not just in the camp. But the situation there that I observed firsthand was that the folks there get assistance, food assistance.
Are they getting enough food assistance? Are they getting enough assistance? I mean, we hear the United States given the money, the United Nations given the money, the European give their assistance, and still you go to the refugees and you see the same condition there, nothing happening. They complain, nobody's helping us, and you see hundreds of thousands of them fleeing to Europe, fleeing to anywhere because of the lack of assistance in the countries surrounding Syria or Iraq.
Well, I'll tell you the reason partly is because they feel they can't go back to Syria, for example, in the camp that I was in. And I will tell you that actually I was thanked by many folks from refugees there who thank the generosity of the American people who have provided resources and help. In fact, the United States has been the primary giver of assistance to folks
Absolutely.
there. It hasn't really been the Europeans and hasn't been the Gulf states. It's really been the United States that has done that. But having said that, you're dealing with a lot of folks, and so the assistance works out to, for each person, about 50 cents a day is what you get for food. That's not a lot of food, and it's certainly not the variety of diet that people need to be healthy to have that kind of nourishment. In addition to that, they get one propane bottle a month to cook, which means you got to be pretty careful as to how you're using that. But the thing that was certainly there, to your point, and as I talked to a number of refugees, was really a sense of despair in that they've lost hope, in that they don't know when they can ever go home. So,
and there are some of them, they will never go home, probably.
It may be, and they've been there a long time.
Yeah.
I mean, I've spoke to families that they were there over 3 years, close to 4 years.
Yes.
When you go to a refugee camp, you normally think you're going to be there a short period of time until things stabilize and you can go home. That hasn't happened for many years, and with the Russians' involvement, as you mentioned, all that makes it more complicated, that it's going to be an even longer period of time, so that they're losing that hope. And I asked the families that I had a chance to chat with in the camp, where do you want to go? And you can't go home right now. And they said, we don't want to go to the United States. We don't want to go to Europe. We just want to go home. That's all they want to do is go home, just like we would want to do the same thing if we were in that situation. Everybody watching this program, you just want to go home, wherever that is.
Most of them, they lost hope of going back home.
They have, they have. Now, but actually it was interesting that while I was there that they were saying there were more folks starting to go back to Syria than coming, but they were going because they felt they had no other option. And they were going to go back. They didn't know what they would find when they got back. They have to live under constant fear, and we know that there are a barrel of bombs that are being dropped and people are killed. So they were being advised you shouldn't do that. But when people feel they have no other option, they were leaving. So we have to focus on that primarily. But certainly there are people we can help, which is why I think we can continue to do more in terms of refugees. The Europeans, the Germans, for example, have accepted large numbers. The United States, we need to do our part.
Okay, let's talk about your letter that you sent to President Obama to increase the number of refugees, to accept them to come to the United States. I mean, we see hundreds of thousands going to Europe, and if we give them the opportunity, I'm pretty sure 90% of them, they would rather come to U.S. or even Canada than staying in Europe, because Europe is not as stable too, and have a lot of problem with large number of, and the service that they're getting in the European country is going to be different than what they're getting in U.S. Your letter, or your thinking, how we could increase the number of refugees coming here and give them the service that they deserve after suffering years in very bad situation there.
Well, I do believe we need to focus our refugee efforts on an area of the world that is suffering. And as I mentioned, a humanitarian crisis that we haven't seen in decades.
That's right.
So the United States now brings in about 85,000 refugees from around the world.
Yes, that's around the world.
It's around the world, 85,000. The President Obama has said we should bring about 10,000 of those from Syria and Iraq. Should be the goal. I believe we can do more. In fact, I think we should. Within that 85,000, I think out of that, I think we should bring in 30,000 folks, Syrian refugees, as well as Iraqi refugees and the religious minorities, which have been persecuted, as you know, and pushed out of Iraq and are in other areas. So that we should do that in the first year. That would be starting in October, this fiscal year 2016, which starts now. That we should do 30,000 and ultimately look to bring, start at 100,000 refugees from Syria, Iraq, and including the religious minorities. And that's a very doable number. If you look at the number of folks who the United Nations goes through and they screen people to make sure that they have a legitimate claim that they are indeed refugees and screen that. They have already recommended that the United States take, or recommended to us to take, it's up to the United States to make that decision, but 18,000 individuals, and they are screening at about 1,000 a month. So over the next 12 months, we have the 18 plus the 12 that'll come, that's 30,000 individuals. Now we have to do our own screening. The United States has to make sure that folks are in Homeland Security. I serve on the Homeland Security. We're gonna do the vetting and the screening necessary to make sure that these are folks who are truly seeking the protection and have been persecuted and don't mean any harm to the United States or anyone else. But we have the ability to do that. We do that already. We can continue to do that. We can do it better, and I've made recommendations to the administration and have joined with some of my colleagues with letters to do that. But we certainly need to do more. To me, it's our values of who we are as Americans. We have always opened up our hearts and have opened up this land to people who seek refuge and who seek a place to live in peace and a place to raise their families and create a better life for themselves.
Yeah, and absolutely, you prove over and over that the immigrant that come to the United States, they always contribute and to society, to the economy, to the social, of the United States. But do we need the Congress approval if we increase the number?
Well, we already have the authorization to bring in 85,000 from around the world. So the president can take action, as he did, to select certain areas or to have certain parameters, and so we have the ability to do that. I'll be honest with you, it's tough to get congressional approval to try to get additional visas or immigrants. It's unfortunately it's become a part of the presidential campaign, and you have some presidential candidates out there that try to demonize immigration, and they seem to forget that we are a land of immigrants.
Absolutely.
But it makes it difficult given that political environment. But we need to step up and understand, and I've seen it with my own eyes firsthand, that we're dealing with a humanitarian crisis that we need to deal with, and we should focus on those individuals who are most vulnerable, those who are facing the most difficult situation. And it's pretty clear that's now in Syria and Iraq and with the religious minorities in particular.
Absolutely, especially the minorities. Are we giving enough service to the refugees that they come in here? I've been hearing a lot of refugees and who came here about 2-3 years ago. They frustrated with lack of service that if it's the social service or the mental health or the school or the assistant that they're giving it to them.
Well,
are we increasing that, or?
We do provide assistance, but it is short-term in nature. So it's enough to get a refugee on their feet and to get them a job and get them working and supporting their family and working with a support group in the community. So, but we can do a better job at it. We can be more efficient at it, and I've worked on legislation to do that, to make sure that the aid that comes actually goes to the refugee family. And we've had some situations where it doesn't necessarily, it goes to a community where they may be initially sent, and in the Chaldean community, for example, if someone sent to Kansas, they'll come to Detroit to be with the support group, and yet a lot of the money stays in Kansas, and that makes no sense. And so
how that could happen? I mean, if you send 100,000 refugees to the United States, all over the United States, they're going to end up, most of them, in Michigan, because they feel comfortable with the community here, very well established, the culture of Michigan, accept foreigners, accept refugees. How could we get those benefits? And I've been hearing a lot about this.
And we need
to come to Michigan.
Yeah, we has to make sure that it's where people are. But certainly refugees won't just go to Michigan. There are other communities. The Syrian community, for example, is large in other places around the country as well. But a lot of folks will go to where their family is, and that's part of I think should be part of the process too. Is if there are family members there. That we know that's a support group. So when a refugee comes here, they get some support to get on their feet. But they also get help from their family, and not only their blood family, but the community,
Sure,
which is a family
absolutely.
that comes together.
And knowing you were involved with the Middle Eastern community for the past probably 20 years, and you have passion about this community, and you understand very well the culture and the family value and how they live and all that. So honestly, with your involvement with the organization and with the support group, those refugees we could serve them much better. Yeah.
Absolutely, and I'm going to be focused on that and continue to focus on this issue and make sure that we're doing what's right.
I know you are short of time, but Senator Gary Peter, on behalf of the whole Middle Eastern community, and majority of them, they know what you're doing. We thank you. We thank you very much for what you're doing, for introducing the bill, for sending the letter to President Obama, to Secretary Kerry, and encourage them to bring more refugees and getting involved with those refugees to make them comfortable here. Thank you very much for that.
Well, thank you. It's good to be on your program again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dear viewer, that was my interview with Senator Gary Peter. I know Senator Gary Peter for over 20 years, and he is the champion, believe me, the champion of the Middle Eastern community and the ethnic minorities, not just in the Middle East, but around the world. And he proved many times that he care about them and do whatever it take to make their life better. And I'm pretty sure for the Syrian, for the Yemenis, for the Libyan, for the Iraqi, all the refugees that comes from the Middle East, Gary Peter, he is the man who's fighting for the right. Thank you very much.